interested in some sort of plan for putting an end to the war, that person is not going to get elected if he or she says that they will recognize Russia's annexations and they will be willing to eliminate all security arrangements with the West. That person is not going to get elected, and that's what's necessary to make this work. But let's put that aside. Let's assume I'm wrong. The question you have to ask yourself is whether the United States is willing to accommodate Russian demands. Do you think that Marco Rubio and these other individuals who Trump has appointed will be willing to go along with a peace deal that makes it clear that Russia won? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. When you talk about Russian demands, the Russians are basically saying, we won this war and we want terms that reflect the fact that we have won the war.
Right. And you can't blame them.
Of course you can't. But at the same time, you know very well the United States is not going to admit that Russia won.
Right.
We'll do everything we can do to prolong this conflict, even once the shooting stops. To prolong this conflict for as far as the eye can see.
John Mearsheimer's analysis sheds light on the ongoing conflict and the geopolitical chessboard that surrounds it. He emphasizes the impossibility of any U.S. administration accepting terms that acknowledge Russia's victory despite the realities on the ground. To understand this, we need to dissect the deeper dynamics of U.S.-Russia relations, the war's broader implications, and the historical context behind these positions. The U.S. government operates on a foundation of global dominance and ideological consistency, particularly when it comes to its role as a defender of liberal democracy. This self-image makes it nearly impossible for American leaders to admit defeat or recognize outcomes that challenge the established international order. This framework explains why any proposal to accept Russia's annexations or to dissolve NATO's security commitments is a non-starter in American politics. The situation becomes even clearer when we look at the individuals shaping U.S. foreign policy. Figures like Marco Rubio and others in Trump's camp, who are likely to have significant influence in the next administration, have built careers on hawkish stances toward Russia. For them, conceding that Russia has won would undermine their entire approach to foreign policy. It would also be a direct challenge to the United States' credibility, both domestically and internationally. Russia, on the other hand, sees this war as existential. Its demands reflect not only its strategic goals, but also its sense of having achieved victory on the battlefield. Moscow has made it clear that it expects the West to acknowledge its gains, particularly in territories like Crimea and the Donbass region. For Russia, anything less would undermine the sacrifices it has made during this conflict and would jeopardize the legitimacy of its leadership. At the heart of Mearsheimer's remarks is the acknowledgement that Russia perceives itself as the victor in the Ukraine war. This self-perception is not just rhetoric. It is the cornerstone of Moscow's negotiating position. Russia's demands include recognition of the annexed territories, such as Crimea and regions in eastern Ukraine, security guarantees that Ukraine will remain neutral and unaffiliated with NATO, a rollback of Western military and political influence in the region. These terms are grounded in Moscow's belief that it has successfully withstood Western sanctions, sustained its military operations, and proven its resilience on the global stage. To Putin and the Russian leadership, anything less than these conditions would be tantamount to admitting defeat. But the United States operates from a different perspective. Accepting Russia's victory would set a dangerous precedent, signaling to other adversaries that they too can achieve their objectives through force. This is why Washington has no interest in acknowledging Russia's success, even if it means prolonging the conflict indefinitely. The notion of prolonging conflicts has been a consistent feature of U.S. foreign policy. From Vietnam to Afghanistan, America has shown a willingness to engage in long-term, low-intensity wars that serve its broader strategic goals. In Ukraine, this means providing just enough support to prevent Russia from achieving a decisive victory, but not enough to completely turn the tide of the war. The aim is to bleed Russia economically, politically, and militarily, all while avoiding direct confrontation. However, this strategy comes with significant risks. As Mearsheimer points out, the longer this conflict drags on, the more destabilizing it becomes. not just for Ukraine and Russia, but for the entire international system. The West's continued support for Ukraine risks escalating tensions with Russia to dangerous levels, particularly if NATO becomes more directly involved. The economic toll is another factor to consider. The war has already strained global markets, disrupted energy supplies, and exacerbated inflation. Europe, in particular, is facing significant challenges as it tries to wean itself off Russian energy while maintaining its support for Ukraine. The longer this conflict continues, the more these economic pressures will grow, potentially leading to political instability in Western nations. At the same time, the conflict has exposed cracks in the U.S.-led international order. Countries in the global south, as well as rising powers like China and India, are increasingly questioning the West's narrative. Many see the conflict not as a battle between democracy and autocracy, but as a struggle for influence in a multipolar world. This shift in perspective is weakening the West's ability to build a unified coalition against Russia. Mearsheimer's insights also touch on the limitations of democratic systems in addressing complex foreign policy challenges. In a democracy like the United States, leaders are beholden to public opinion, which is often shaped by media narratives and short-term concerns. This makes it difficult to pursue policies that require long-term sacrifices or that go against deeply ingrained ideologies. Even if a candidate emerged who was willing to accept Russia's demands, they would face insurmountable political challenges. A platform based on recognizing Russia's annexations or dismantling NATO's security framework would be political suicide. This is why Mearsheimer believes that no such leader will be elected in the foreseeable future. But let's entertain the hypothetical scenario where such a leader does come to power. Even then, the question remains whether the broader U.S. establishment, including Congress, the military, and the intelligence community, would support a peace deal that effectively concedes defeat. Given the entrenched interests and ideologies at play, this seems highly unlikely. The implications of this stalemate are profound. For Ukraine, it means more suffering and destruction as the war drags on. For Russia, it means continued isolation and economic hardship, even if it maintains its territorial gains. For the United States, it means a prolonged conflict that drains resources and diverts attention from other global challenges, such as China's rise. The most likely outcome, as Mearsheimer suggests, is a frozen conflict. Even if active hostilities cease, the underlying tensions will remain, fueling instability in the region for years to come. This scenario benefits no one, but leaves the door open for future escalations. In conclusion, Mearsheimer's analysis forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power, ideology, and international politics. The United States' refusal to acknowledge Russia's victory is not just about Ukraine. It's about preserving a global order that is increasingly under strain. As the war continues, the question is not just how it will end, but what kind of world will emerge in its aftermath. According to John Mearsheimer, even if you got somebody who is interested in some sort of plan for putting an end to the war, that person is not going to get elected if he or she says they will recognize Russia's annexations and be willing to eliminate all security arrangements with the West. That person is not going to get elected, and that's what's necessary to make this work. But let's put that aside and assume I'm wrong. The question you have to ask yourself is whether the United States is willing to accommodate Russian demands. Do you think that Marco Rubio and these other individuals who Trump has appointed will be willing to go along with a peace deal that makes it clear that Russia won? I mean, that's what we're talking about here when we talk about Russian demands.
The Russians are basically saying, we won this war, and we want terms that reflect the fact that we have won.
And you can't blame them. Of course, you can't. But at the same time, you know very well the United States is not going to admit that Russia won. We will do whatever we can to prolong this conflict, even once the shooting stops, to keep this conflict alive for as far as the eye can see. Thanks for watching.